Item 14, Resource Management Reform Draft Submission on the MfE consultation document. Have we got staff here for this one or online? Have we got staff for this? Right, okay. Perfect timing. So this is item 14. We've obviously been briefed on this, and there's been some discussion around it, and some further changes. So anything that you particularly wanted to highlight or point out?
Just to bring your attention, we've just made some last-minute changes that have just been uploaded, or hopefully have been uploaded. We've had some feedback from Ngāi Tahu just in the last hour or so. So just some minor changes that we've just done to align with their position.
All right, thank you.
It was just around Helen's points, whether we could get staff commentary on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yes.
So do you want to take us through the additional changes first?
Sure.
And then if staff have got any comments on the matters that Helen Broughton raised in the matter that Helen Broughton raised in the deputation, because if you didn't cover that, I'm sure there'll be questions on it, so it might be worth covering that off up front.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you all for considering this paper today. This paper's come to Finance and Performance as it's a committee of the whole and has delegation for approving submissions. Submissions often, as you'll appreciate, have limited time frames, so yeah, we appreciate you pivoting to consider a planning matter today. Since the council briefing earlier this month, we have made some minor changes to the draft submission. That's in line with the feedback we've received from you as elected members, so thank you for that. Some minor wording changes to align our submission with the Canterbury Mayoral Forum's submission. And as David's just alluded to, we've just received comments and feedback from staff at Te Runanga o Ngāi Tahu. So we've worked those into the submission that's on the screen today. The submission points, I'm not sure you would have seen, or the changes from Ngāi Tahu, mainly centre on wording, references to iwi, hapu and mana whenua, just using consistent language there. And they did have a comment about the proposal for a national Māori entity and that Ngāi Tahu representation should be considered mandatory on that national Māori entity. So I think we're happy to stand by that view as well and align our submission there. With Helen Broughton's feedback and the deputation you received this morning, we did receive that feedback from Helen individually. We had sought feedback from community boards as collectives, so we were unable, or we didn't think it appropriate at that point to work in individual feedback. But I'm pleased that Helen brought the deputation to you today, and I think David can speak to the technical point she raised about the suggestion of removing non-complying activity status.
Yeah, and I mean, Helen's particular point was not endorsing support for non-complying to be removed, and she obviously supports non-complying remaining, so it would be good to get some comment on that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So this proposal to remove non-complying activity status has come from the independent review that was set up and chaired by Judge Randerson a couple of years ago, and so they looked at this in quite a lot of detail, and there's been a number of there's quite a lot of case law on this activity status over the last number of years. Their recommendation was to remove it, that it adds complexity and doesn't really achieve any efficiency in the process, and so that was the position that we've taken to support that they've done a thorough analysis on this, and we concur with their views. I understand the points that Helen was making this morning, and the issue with the non-compliant activity status is that it requires initial analysis, which can be considered under a discretionary activity status. We consider if the objectives and policies of the plan are really clear, then there is nothing lost by removing the non-compliant activity status. it makes it a much more streamlined process, but it also will mean that under discretionary activity status, there is full analysis of all the effects. So we don't consider that it is something that will lose anything on the process by removing it. It will make it a lot more efficient and a lot more simple. And that is what the conclusion that the Randerson report came to as well.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions on that particular matter that Helen raised first of all, and then we'll move to other questions? Sam?
Probably just one. I mean, being pragmatic about it, is it the end of the world if we remove that point from the submission?
No. Look, it's not a it's something we could easily remove.
Because it's just not offering a view on it.
Yeah, that's
cool.
fine.
Okay,
Yep.
thanks.
So we would just, in that case, that would see us remain silent on that matter.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Pauline?
So Helen's view was that if we leave it in there, the non-complying activity, it's almost like a red flag, and it focuses a greater degree of scrutiny on that activity. Whereas if it was all lumped in, was just discretionary, it would perhaps slip through without that greater degree of scrutiny. So do you feel that you agree with that, or you disagree with that?
No. There is some additional tests that I'll continue a copy of the Randerson report, which has gone through us in detail. And non-compliant activity status does have additional tests.
Yeah.
One of them is whether the effects will be minor. So these are just the quotes from the Randerson report. These additional tests result in unnecessary debate on what constitutes a minor effect. The discretionary activity status can consider that without this need for this additional test. So a discretionary activity status means the decision maker has full discretion to consider everything. So the Randerson report has concluded that it's not efficient to have an additional test when the decision maker can already consider everything. So that's the conclusion of the Randerson report. Look, if you want to remove it, it's not a significant issue for us. We're happy to remain silent on it and leave it up for the Randerson.
I'm concerned about it because I think it is an additional safety barrier, and I like the way that Helen pointed out the risks that are involved if you do take it out. And I'm wondering, rather than just staying silent on it, that actually we make a comment saying that we don't support that being removed. So I would like to get the feeling of the room around that personally.
I'd rather just stay silent.
I'm sorry, Sarah.
I'd rather just stay silent if you ask.
Okay. So there'll be an opportunity to ask further questions and to comment on that as we go, but certainly there's a couple of people already raised that there's possibly an appetite for removing commentary on that. Pauline, you go one step further and suggest that we should make a comment supporting its retention. All right. Leanne and then Yanni.
So I was just struggling to understand why we would remove it from the submission or stay silent when the purpose of the reform is to make things more streamlined and easier, and that we don't lose anything. So we don't actually lose anything because the discretionary one is very broad.
Yes.
I mean, people get very confused because restricted discretionary is actually a much tighter provision, but discretionary is broad. So it does enable all of these issues to be looked at as appropriate. So I just wonder, in terms of our own district plan, and I'm sorry for asking this question because I don't know the answer, how much do we rely on the non-complying activity status that we don't, that couldn't be addressed in discretionary?
Yeah, that's the exact point that the Randerson report was making, that this is more efficient and doesn't lose much, and that's the same conclusion that the independent hearings panel essentially made on our district plan. So there are very few non-complying activities in the district plan, and they considered that the discretionary activity status provides all the benefits without making it more complex. So that's essentially where we were at with our district plan.
Thank you. Yanni.
Yeah, I mean, I would support making comment around this. I do think we should retain non-complying activities. I think when the RMA, I just wanted to check with staff, my understanding is when the RMA was changed, that it was supposed to enable us to have more use of prohibited activities, but we don't seem to be doing that. And so, like, for example, just to give some examples of things that I would think it would be useful to have a non-complying process around would be things like petrol stations and village centres, or waste dumps, for example, in the middle of communities, like the car yards, the recycling metal thing, where you'd want to have. There's just some sorts of activities that just don't seem compatible.
Is this a question, Yanni, or something that might be more appropriate?
Yeah, so I'm just trying
debate?
to ask staff, like, is there any sorts of activities that they think that we should be using non-complying mechanisms within the district plan that would be more useful than just having it as a discretionary activity? Or if not, should we be making more use of prohibited activity, which is the other step towards not enabling something to happen?
We very rarely, in fact, I don't think we've got any in our plan. There is some in the regional council's plan, use prohibited activity status, because it is a status where people cannot apply for consent. So it is closing the door completely on any activity. So it would have to be very, very an activity that we know for sure that the effects are so severe that we will never ever contemplate it. As I say, there's very little non-complying. I think there is we've got non-compliant activity status from memory around activities near electricity transmission corridors, so pylons that actually will have risk to life if we have activities close to there. But apart from that, we very rarely use it because discretionary activity status does enable the decision maker to have full discretion of all the effects without any limits on their decision making ability. So it's a much more efficient decision making process. So,
all right.
So just following on from the Mayor's point, do we know how many non-complying activities that we've approved consent for versus rejected versus discretionary?
I wouldn't have that number to hand. We could find that out. Back to you.
All right, thank you. So, Tim.
Thank you. Two quick ones. With regards to prohibited activity, with the sea level rise and climate change, would we not talk to the government about, and this is, we've got a huge coastline, we've got a lot of low-lying areas, that is something that would be used for all councils or territorial authorities, etc., with regards to prohibiting building in perhaps foreseeable problem areas, because it would save a lot of councils and regional councils, etc., a lot of issues in the future.
Yep. So the prohibited activity status is not being proposed to be removed. That is still on the table. It's still an option, and we know that the government are also doing a separate bill around climate change adaptation that we're expecting to see a draft of later this year. So that may well address some of the issues around sea level rise. So the prohibited status is still on the table. It's still an option.
Okay. The second one, when you look at, say, you go to hearings and the community feel that they've been cut out or things pushed through or whatever, I just is an extra assurance to the communities, because if you're looking at recently, say, at St Albans, they won, but it cost them $60,000. But they also had the right people to contact the right to connect and hire the right people to help them. Most communities don't have that. So how is the proposals going to assist our communities in raising issues through the RMA? Because if you talk to the communities, as I have, they're feeling further and further disconnected, and it is unachievable for them.
Just to be clear, the non-compliant activity status, there is still the option to grant consent for a non-compliant
Yep.
activity, and there are some consents that are granted, and happy as in response to Councillor Johansson's question to find out the figures of that. So it doesn't mean that the non-compliant activities will not ever occur, and so that's the other risk of having additional activity status. It does give the perception that for the community that these activities won't occur when consent still could be granted.
But the level, say, for a discretionary is easier to achieve than a non-complying activity.
Not necessarily, but look, because the discretionary activity, you do have the full discretion for decision making. But happy to remove that point from the submission if that's where the.
Okay, so it sounds as though there are some different views around the table around whether we should remove the point or whether we should leave it there. It would be good just to take some broad guidance here. I mean, are people generally in favour of keeping it or removing it? Melanie?
I was going to say I'll just move it.
Just wait. We've got technical issues. I think we've lost.
Sorry, Mel?
Lost.
I'll just move.
Oh, right. Have we lost the people that were on Zoom?
Yeah.
All right.
Just probably wait for 5 minutes to.
Are we expecting to get them back quickly? Or?
We're just working on it. The live streaming is still working.
Right.
So,
But the people that were on Zoom are no longer participating in the meeting?
yeah.
Right.
We better wait.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm wondering whether we should take morning tea now, come back and complete this item, then go to CCHL, then do the public excluded, then come back and do the remaining. So let's take 15 minutes for morning tea. Let's resume at 11:15, and we'll complete this item at that time when hopefully we've got the remote participants back. All right, so 15 minutes till 11:15. I'll adjourn until then. Thank you.